prehistoric world of Pokemon, a time when Omanyte and Relicanth swam the seas, a period when Archeops and Aerodactyl soared the skies above, and an era in which Tyrantrum and Aurorus roamed the lands. But with over 300 million years of confirmed history in the world of Pokemon, there's far more to uncover. From the formation of continents by Regigigas to the first Carbink that became Diancie, the ancient groups of Terapagos, and even whether or not the Great Crater of Paldea was the impact site for the meteor that caused our prehistoric Pokemon to go extinct. There's a lot of questions to answer. What was this prehistoric world really like? Which of these prehistoric beasts truly lived together? And what really caused their extinctions? And thanks to the power of science, I can finally answer all of these questions and more in solving the prehistoric world of Pokemon. Howdy there, I'm Carbink, and this is a story that will span over 300 million years. In fact, we're going to even briefly begin with the creation of the world of Pokemon itself. As we continue throughout the years, we'll talk plenty about how these prehistoric Pokemon fit into their environments and what those environments were potentially like. And yes, before you even have to ask, we will be discussing Pokemon such as Tangrowth, Yanmega, and Mamoswine alongside other special Pokemon that appeared in this prehistoric era, and any that may be related, or some that may be related to our prehistoric Pokemon. But let's begin with the creation of the world of Pokemon itself. The funny thing about the world of Pokemon is that it's just called that. I think it may have been accidentally called Earth a couple of times, but otherwise it's just the world of Pokemon. But for my own ease, if I call it Earth Pokemon, if I call it Earth, or whatever else, just bear with me. Now, throughout the history of the franchise, there have been a number of retcons, such as an old interview stating that the world was not created by Pokemon, but since then we have seen the writers double down on the idea that Pokemon are not just concepts within the world, but also the ones who shape the world itself. In addition to, well, animals were supposed to actually exist within the world of Pokemon, then go extinct, but we're not discussing that today because that's not canon anymore to some degree. So we will assume all of that is the case going forward, and I wanted to address those now at the very least. When Arceus created the planet, there were some basic requirements necessary in order to support life as it is in real life. Things like liquid water, energy, and nutrients. Thank you, NASA, for that information, but it goes further, because thanks to our planet's core, which is a dense inner core followed by a molten outer core, then the mantle and the thin crust, we have something else that can support life. And this is basically the domain of Groudon. Groudon is known to have created the lands themselves and expand the continents through the power of its primal energy. Energy that it had upon its first rise in the world of Pokemon, and the same energy that is derived from the planet itself, or even something it would gain in the future from special meteors. Groudon is even described as the continent Pokemon that has control over land and is capable of creating sweltering heat waves that would spread throughout the world and eventually burn up the world completely. Now, that sounds a lot like heat escaping the planet, but uncontrolled. And to add to this, we do find that Groudon is known to rest within lava while being encased in a layer of rock. But let's be real, we know even if it wasn't encased in rock, it wouldn't matter. This gargantuan lizard just takes dips, skinny dips into that stuff all the time. Now, in that primal form, every step that it takes, it creates new land with through the power of magma. Its body always shimmers with heat, and it has weather manipulating powers. This is actually incredibly important to our understanding of the world of Pokemon. In fact, all of this actually is. Heat doesn't just disappear, it spreads out. And, well, that's still technically speaking, meaning all of this energy that Groudon is releasing has to go somewhere. And the energy will go into our seas, into our skies, everywhere. Luckily, there is plenty of water for this heat to be absorbed into, thanks to the existence of Kyogre. Now, our whale friend here is said to be the personification of the sea itself, creator of the world's oceans, and a creature that has control over water in its entirety. It can create a massive rain cloud that will spread all over the world and eventually drown it completely. It expanded the seas by summoning heavy rainstorms and massive tidal waves. In its own primal form, it can widen the seas just by taking a little swim. Its body matches the composition of seawater, and it too can manipulate the weather itself. Now, the fact that Kyogre specifically matches seawater is massively important, for while water itself is an infinite resource, fresh water is not infinite and is separate again from seawater. And Kyogre here specifically represents our saltwater or seawater, which I don't think I know anybody who actually represents freshwater, unless it's Suicune. It might be the closest that I can get to actually figuring that one out. Nevertheless, our two individuals here have abilities of Desolate Land and Primordial Sea. Desolate Land would be in reference to the idea that land itself was not inhabited in these ancient times. In fact, for an incredible amount of time, 3.5 billion years ago, according to NASA, the seas themselves were between 131 and 185 degrees Fahrenheit, or 55 to 85 degrees Celsius. So you are boiling water. Though this is still an estimate, and the land itself would be a whole different story of incredible heat, let alone the air. Through this, though, we can see how Groudon and Kyogre fit into this picture. Though without intervention, life would never thrive. For the seas need to stop expanding, land needs to finish taking shape for now, and the world needs to cool, all while gaining a protective barrier to lessen the harshness of the sun's rays and keeping in the planet or around it what is vital to life. And so, before the oceans were even fully formed, the atmosphere came to be, and so did Rayquaza. Rayquaza held the power, and actually still holds the power, to stop the ancient beasts of Groudon and Kyogre, to separate them and put them to night-night as their primal energy dwindled due to the energy used from the planet itself. Rayquaza, during the first time that it had to stop their conflict, did not need the power of Mega Evolution to resolve this issue. But now that they are gone, and actually slumbering encased in rock, under the water, in the ocean basin, and in lava, whatever, our Sky Serpent now has a whole new job and set of issues to deal with, because the world was hot, the seas were boiling, and life was uninhabitable. So through the weather manipulating powers that Rayquaza had held, Rayquaza spread the heat around, it reinforced our atmosphere, and many of the natural chemicals that rose into the air from eruptions caused by Groudon were repurposed. In fact, this is when Meteor would have came into existence. Bet you weren't expecting that little meteorite guy. Something most other people miss is that Meteor is not, or at least the majority of them are likely not from space. It is a Pokemon formed specifically in the stratosphere from an aggregation of mutated nanoparticles, where it absorbs particulate matter from which it builds its core and shell. The stratosphere is said to contain much of the ozone in the atmosphere, and there is more ultraviolet radiation here, and to add to all of this, not only do most meteors burn up in the mesosphere above, but there is also said to be microbial life in our stratosphere thanks to studies from NASA. Either way, long story short, meteor are in our atmosphere all around the world. They just tend to only fall down in the Lentil and Alola region for some odd reason. This might just be a reference to being able to see the stars easier in places with less light pollution, but I'm not sure. But back to our history of the world, Rayquaza is out here doing all of us a favor and taking care of the planet. But while it is out and about, it's gonna start noticing a few things while it eats up some meteor snacks here and there. For now that the planet is fully formed, life has not actually begun to flourish. We need time to let everything cool down. And during the time in which the planet is cooling down, our main man Regigigas is doing the work of Arceus and moving the continents, like quite literally. In fact, while we assume it only does this once, I would propose that it does this many times. After all, there were other supercontinents before Pangea in the real world was created. So multiple continental movements in history would make sense and would even bring in the side game of Pokemon Conquest and the Ransei region, which is shaped in Arceus' image, and many people do believe that Ransei may have been the Pokemon world's version of Pangea before it was split apart and formed many of the other continents that we are aware of. This would also result in Sinnoh region being created around Mount Coronet, and during this procedure, Stark Mountain would have been created due to shifts in the crust of the world, allowing Heatran to be formed in a pool of lava. For you see, the beautiful thing about lava is that it can often be described as the blood of the Earth itself, the blood of a continent, of a landmass. It isn't the most accurate way to describe it, but when you rip apart large landmasses that belong to tectonic plates, and you have magma sitting within and all around that, you're gonna release a lot of pressure, and that will result in the magma underneath spewing out into the world as beautiful, beautiful, and dangerous lava. And Heatran is another legendary that now exists thanks to these events. Heatran guards the Magma Stone, otherwise literally translated as the Volcano Stone. And what makes all of this that much better is that there are multiple Heatran canonically in the world of Pokemon. Whether you look at the anime or the games, and I'm going to focus my brain on the games for this explanation, they exist in Sinnoh's Stark Mountain, the Scorched Slab of Hoenn, Reversal Mountain of Unova, and the Lava Dome Sanctum of Hisui. Even if we remove Hisui's, then we still have 3 entirely separate Heatran within the world of Pokemon, because there is 0 reason for this Pokemon to leave its own volcano when it is so determined to protect the Magma Stone that it fights anybody and everybody getting close to it. And also, the Magma Stone is said to allow you to control Heatran in lore, so you definitely don't want to just leave that behind and let somebody control your entire existence. That'd be pretty bad. Now for a little lesson, as if this whole thing wasn't a lesson already. When we look at the formation of volcanoes, or even mountains for that matter, they usually occur along plate boundaries. Divergent and convergent plate boundaries are boundaries that either pull away from each other or basically push into each other and go under each other. One usually goes under the other. And that's for those two in that order, divergent, convergent. These are also the events that are most likely to result in volcanoes. Meanwhile, convergent plate boundaries will likely only result in a mountain being formed. It's why also mountains continue to form due to subduction, and then the way that everything goes under and pushes everything up, comes back up. It's the whole process that I'm not going to talk about. I missed my geology classes. But as such, you can see why volcanoes and mountains can be in the same or similar areas to each other throughout the world. Basically, if they are on a plate boundary that is divergent or convergent, then you have the chance of one of these happening. Heck, honestly, if we really wanted to, we could probably figure out a number of plate boundaries within the world of Pokemon just because of this basic little bit of information. Though it wouldn't be perfect, it would be more of a scientific guess, which a lot of this just is for the most part anyway. It's theoretical science. What do you want from me? From here, Heatran doesn't really serve much of a role, at least not directly. Some of the volcanic eruptions we speak of later may have been due to Heatran in some capacity, but I won't explicitly state that that is the case because we don't know for sure. But now, as we move forward, we can finally discuss the moment in which life first began to flourish upon the world of Pokemon, or at least Pokemon life did. The ancestor of all Pokemon, Mew, is born. Now, to clarify, Mew is not the actual ancestor of every single Pokemon. I hate to pop that bubble, but in the name of science, I will. Now, there are a number of god Pokemon that exist separate from Mew, and a number of other Pokemon that are born from what is called a biogenesis. I hope I said that word right. Life that came into existence from inorganic matter. This would include Pokemon such as Magnemite, Meltan, or as we stated earlier, Meteor. Nevertheless, Mew is the ancestor of Earth's Pokemon. Maybe Pokemon from space if it spent some time running around in the stars, which, judging by the intro of the first Pokemon anime, it may have. Now, with Mew, we don't really know how Pokemon came to be. It's stated that there is only one Mew, so mating isn't really a thing, and no, you can't judge mating based upon what Pokemon can mate in the game of Pokemon. That mechanic is not accurate, not even to the Pokédex. But I would like to propose something funny and then a real reasoning afterwards. The funny reason is that we could look at Mew, and we know that Mew is intelligent, but also very lively in personality. Mew, knowing Transform and having the ability to duplicate itself thanks to it knowing every Pokemon move, split itself up into multiple Mew. These Mew began to transform themselves into other creatures and eventually just stayed in those forms for the rest of their lives, producing more and more of these Pokemon. And that's fun, and that's cool, but that's not accurate, I would dare say. A theory that would make way more sense is that Mew likely just shed off some DNA of itself that grew over millions of years into Pokemon. Those bits of DNA would just be natural bacteria, since we are filled, and pretty much everything else, with good, quote-unquote, bacteria that helps keep us alive. These bacteria would have become Pokemon, just like how eventually mitochondria looked at another bacterial cell or eukaryotic cell, whatever you want to say, and said, hey bub, if I go inside of you, I'll process all the food in your body for you, so that way you can have energy, I get food, you get food, and then you know what? You could spend your time doing other stuff. And that's like a super simplified version of how mitochondria may have first jumped into another cell. But that may have actually just happened within the world of Pokemon. And we have to ask, all right, well, what Pokemon mitochondria made a deal to become partners in crime with another Pokemon cell to become multicellular organisms? And you know what that could be? That would be Pokérus itself. I mean this in the most genuine way possible. Pokérus is the powerhouse of this cell. I couldn't say with a straight face. I have used what science and knowledge I have multiple times to try and understand Pokérus, but this might be the last time I sit down and fully commit to the idea that Pokérus, something that is directly described as living microscopic organisms, are Pokemon bacteria. Viruses are not living creatures, at least not by our definition of living. In addition, Pokérus changes Pokemon DNA. It affects them even after they are cured. It makes them stronger. It makes them faster. It makes them evolve sooner in the manga. And yes, you could apply that to RNA-based viruses because they rapidly change. They will cause some level, or they can cause some level of DNA change. But there's something different about Pokérus as a whole, especially since it's being called a living organism. It does not harm the Pokemon, and it in fact cannot be cured. It jumps from Pokemon to Pokemon, then just disappears altogether, only to back into existence again. Like super ancient bacteria immune to all methods of treatment, but in a good way. It's also very interesting to consider that a singular type of bacteria is able to affect every type of Pokemon, even if they weren't a descendant of Mew, but it doesn't, not to our knowledge, affect humanity. This could theoretically mean that there is a singular binding bit of DNA in all Pokemon that is shared by every single Pokemon, and this is what Pokérus attaches itself to. And eventually, Pokérus would run rampant and do its own thing, and we'd get Pokemon. But moving on from Pokérus and Mew, we could talk about what Pokemon states is currently the oldest Pokemon that we are aware of canonically. But before we do, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you are enjoying this so far, please ensure that you do subscribe, share this with others, and honestly, as I go through this video, comment. Commenting is one of the best ways to help a channel grow alongside watch time. It literally goes watch time, then comments. Plus, I like to read your comments. If you have any dinosaur facts, if you have any fossil facts, anything at all regarding the prehistoric world, please share them with me. I love the prehistoric world, and I, again, usually read every comment, even if I don't immediately react to them. If you would like to go the extra mile, please do consider becoming a member of the channel on YouTube or Patreon for as little as $3 a month. It makes a massive difference, and I would love to hit even upwards of 1,000 members, so that way the channel is nice and stable without having to worry about ad revenue, and I can commission artists for thumbnails or even look at editors, so that way these videos can have even better quality and come out faster. For now though, once again, thank you so much for watching, and on with the video. 300 million years ago, once the world began to cool and the oceans were not as terrible, but they're still warm. I'm gonna clarify that now. They were still very warm. Life would finally begin to flourish. This would be the equivalent of the Paleozoic era. More specifically, we're gonna jump into our Cambrian period. If you don't understand how that works, allow me to tell you. Basically, you have entire eras. It's like the big umbrella. Meanwhile, the people under the umbrella are the periods, the specific cuts of timelines in between it all. Or you can imagine it like a sandwich. I don't know why I keep going to like food, but there you go. Enjoy yourself. Now, again, we are specifically diving into what would be the Pokemon world's equivalent of the Cambrian period. This is when the Cambrian explosion occurred, the time in which animals began to become more diverse. And essentially, that would mean they are more and more different from each other. There's no real reason that we understand that why this would have occurred, or know for sure why this would have occurred. We just know it did. And it could be a combination of things, as most things are. Whether that be oxygen levels, the climate having been warm, the sea levels rising, and land masses being low. There's a lot of factors, I gotta be real with you. Though, this is also when we see our first known Pokemon. Genesect's original version lived during this time, in an era in which it did not have the advancements that Team Plasma bestowed it with or revived it with. Now, let's break down Genesect, because while alongside it there were other Pokemon that kind of lived in this era, Genesect is its own entirely separate Pokemon that we have otherwise never seen in its base form. Beginning with Genesect's habits, it is shown to produce a silk-like substance from its claw that will harden into a brownish stone, and through this ability it creates a nest. They are communal with one leader, as we see in the Genesect movie as well, and their big ol' blaster is very similar to the pronotum of a tree hopper insect. The pronotum is the prominent plate-like structure that covers all or part of the thorax of some insects, but depending on how the pronotum is shaped or displayed in general, allows us to differentiate between insects, identify them, and in the case of Genesect here, its characteristics and overall shape makes it lean more and more towards the concept of being a tree hopper. And honestly, depending on which ones you look at, we see the tree hopper with big ol' eyes in the same places, and its pronotum sitting upon its body, very similar to how Genesect holds itself and its cannon. And as a small tangent, tree hoppers are some of the strangest bugs I have seen when conducting all of this online research for Pokemon. And if you didn't tell me they were all related, I would have never guessed that they were even the same insect for that matter. They're within the same family of insects as cicadas and leafhoppers, so there's even the chance that Genesect, if we are ever blessed with its original form, may actually be designed after those bad boys when it finally gets hopefully released. Because Pokemon likes to break rules all the time, as we will very quickly learn soon. But back to Genesect, I find it incredibly odd that it would have existed in the same time as our next entries, because that would imply that Genesect is not actually an insect, for insects just didn't really exist at this time, not yet. Honestly, Genesect seems like it should even have a jaw, but we don't know if that was because of Team Plasma or if it actually had a jaw. This is incredibly important because jaws did not exist in this time period. They hadn't even been evolutionarily developed at this point in time, as reflected by the other Pokemon I will discuss very soon. But to close out Genesect, it should technically, if it really is an insect, belong in an entirely different era that I will just at least mention it in later. For now, we can move on to speak about Kabuto and Kabutops. Now, Kabuto is based on the trilobite and horseshoe crab, and those range back to about 521 million years ago to our knowledge. I would even be willing to bet that Kabuto is based on the original trilobite, thanks to its design matching the basic description of a trilobite, basically just meaning a 3-section arthropod, while also being in the same family, but not direct ancestors of pillbugs, otherwise known as woodlouses. And if you can't imagine what that looks like in the Pokemon world, I point you to Golisopod. Speaking of horseshoe crabs, Kabuto maintains its physical appearance through its evolution to be similar to them, but we'll talk about that later, because that's really important. In terms of diet, though, when we think of trilobites, they potentially ate worms, other invertebrates, but were otherwise filter feeders. Meanwhile, horseshoe crabs ate small clams, crustaceans, and worms, maybe other animals and algae. They would crush the food with their legs before putting it into their mouth since, again, no jaws. Kabuto actually follows this idea pretty strongly, considering it is said to be a fast and powerful swimmer that would hide on the sea floor. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not see any fins or tails on Kabuto, meaning that it is as great of a swimmer that it claims to be. And if that is the case, then that means that those 4 legs are powerful and will crush some other Pokemon for a snack. Fits perfectly. Now, what also would aid Kabuto from any predators is that apparently, according to its Pokédex, it had eyes on its back that glow, meaning that it can keep watch and scare away any potential predators at the same time. These adaptations and abilities have allowed Kabuto to remain entirely unchanged for 300 million years as living Pokemon have been discovered. This very specifically relates back to the horseshoe crab, which has very much gone fairly unchanged throughout time. Now, again, Kabutops did evolve from Kabuto, but it may have also evolved in the traditional Darwinian sense, like in real life. This is hinted at by information stating that this change is thought to be due to its prey moving onto land as well, with Kabutops now presenting long legs and 2 massive scythe arms. And once again, it is not related to Scyther and is entirely unrelated for that matter. This is simply another example of convergent evolution, similar to Diglett and Wiglet. With Kabutops, I would normally estimate that it lived about 40 million years in the future from where we are right now, basically within the next period of time. But we are keeping it here because we are focusing on the way the world of Pokemon stated its Pokemon or world evolved. Though, through our understanding of Kabutops evolving from a horseshoe crab-like creature and its base design, we can very well surmise that Kabutops is based on one of the scariest sea creatures I've ever seen in my entire life, and that is the sea scorpion. And these creatures were between 1 to 3 meters in length. They were fierce predators, and in fact, were one of the apex predators in all of history. And while Kabutops does not state it was an apex predator, I would be willing to believe it was very close to becoming one, at least early on. Though, it is directly stated that it is unknown what led to its extinction. We'll worry about that later, though. Kabutops is specifically also stated to have been in the process of evolving from a water dweller to a land dweller as it still had its gills. Again, that goes back to the idea of Darwinian evolution. It could swim up to 29 knots, which is 33 miles per hour. This dude swims faster than a car should be going in a school zone. By the way, that's 53 kilometers an hour for all of you that use superior metrics. Now, I would specifically like to suggest that Kabutops may have even been inspired by the Hippertopterus, which was a sea scorpion with horseshoe crab-like features, allowing us to see the idea behind its evolution. But what, may you ask, were these Pokemon eating? Because I haven't said that they were eating any other Pokemon, but they're going after prey. Well, my dear viewer, other than the next Pokemon we will discuss, they were eating plankton. And no, I don't mean they were eating some form of plankton Pokemon, or at least not that we have been made aware of. No. If they were filter feeding, then they were straight up eating normal plankton, a real-life creature that is mentioned in the Pokédex entries of multiple Pokemon, such as Starmie and Gastrodon. This is not a mistake. It has been done in multiple generations and continues to be stated. Now, knowing plankton exists in the world of Pokemon but have not been depicted visually will bother me until I get to see them. if I die and do not get to see a plankton in the world of Pokemon, I will haunt all of Game Freak. Nevertheless, Kabuto would be eating plankton, and so would some of our other seafaring Pokemon. I couldn't help it. But here's the kicker. No other Pokemon is said to exist during this time period by the information found in the Pokedex. And bear with me, because it's gonna get messy, but I have this all solved and cleared up. Omanyte was said in other Pokedex entries of other Pokemon to be hunted by Pokemon, such as Archeops, meaning that it would have had to survive multiple extinction events that wiped out almost every single shred of life on 2 of those mass extinction events. Meaning, this is when things become very tricky in regards to understanding the world of Pokemon, but it gets even messier, because there are only 2 references as to when Omanyte was alive within the world of Pokemon, and they're both within the anime. And yes, we've moved on to Omanyte. I realized I didn't make that clear. I apologize. In the first season, episode 46, they were said to have become extinct tens of thousands of years ago, and it even states in it that it and Kabuto went extinct together. Meanwhile, in episode 163, they're believed to have lived over 2 billion years ago. So what does that mean for our analysis? I'm going to make the assumption then that Omanyte did live alongside Kabuto as some of the earliest Pokemon, and by all of these standards, fossil Pokemon either did not have to face multiple mass extinction events, or they simply survived the majority of them, which theoretically is possible. Even though they're supposed to be based on true Ammonites in terms of Omanyte, they aren't following the true Ammonite species in terms of how long they were around. Instead, they just are all Ammonites in some capacity. There is no other way around this for our analysis. With all of that in mind and our understanding of it, and I'll reinforce that later, let's move on fully to talk about Ammonites, Omanytes, and Omastars. And of course, I have to start out with showing off the fact that I do in fact have a real-life fossil of our Lord Helix. Feast your eyes upon a real fossil. And I've just always been a fossil and bones nerd all in all, thanks to my forensics degree and work in natural science. And so I was enamored immediately upon seeing this. I could have gotten some of our other Pokemon fossils. I could have gotten a Cradily. I could have gotten some... actually, I literally could have gotten Pachycephalosaurus, which is our dome-headed Pokemon that likes to headbutt things. At least I could have gotten, like, its eggshell or something along those lines. But I didn't want to spend a lot of money. I just wanted one really nice thing, and I'm really happy to have it, because then I could show it to you guys, because they're not... Depending on which ones you get, they're actually not that expensive. Now, either way, let's actually move on, I digress, and talk about our Pokemon, because Omanyte is likely based, again, on true Ammonites, having lived a very long time and having the same proper shape for their shells. They're basically just believed to be like cephalopods with a shell. So just imagine an octopus schlumped into a shell, and that's how you get Omanyte. Even though Omanyte itself has 10 limbs in total, which is really odd. And as a small tangent to that, they did discover a common ancestor of octopi, octopuses, and vampire squid that did have 10 arms, but that wasn't until the year 2022, to my knowledge, so it's just a coincidence. Now, Omanyte would travel through the oceans, regulating its buoyancy by storing and releasing air in its shell, while using its tentacles to control the direction in which it moved. Kind of like an undersea plane, I guess, which that also implies that the air it released was its propulsion device, which is not as strange as it sounds. After all, there are creatures that shoot water out of their body for movement. Nevertheless, Omanyte directly states that it would feed on plankton, but that it would also be preyed upon by Archeops and Caracosta, meaning that, again, it lived for billions of years, 2 billion, if we are to fully believe the anime, unchanged, and survived until nature decided that it had enough of it and sent another creature on Earth to show it the pecking order. Literally considering both of these Pokemon have beaks. You get it? Now, hold on, because it gets even better. Because in the modern day, in the Giant's Foot of Galar, we find Omanyte who were released into the wild, Kabuto, who are just naturally found in the world, let's be real, they're, there are horseshoe crabs after all, so not a big deal. But then we also get Archean and Caracosta, meaning that they either continue to live in secret without going extinct thanks to Regigigas living there, or what's more likely is that people are releasing fossils left, right, and center in the wild, which is something that is stated in the Pokédex of Omanyte Omastar. This extends to other fossils as well, though. It's not stated in their Pokédex, but they are alive and roaming around the Giant's Foot, Tyrantrum, and Aurorus. But we can, again, reliably claim that none of them should be in the wild, as we have the wonderful and actually terrible Careless, whose name is literally a English pun on careless, as she and her assistant are supposed to represent the people who royally messed up fossils during what is called the Great Fossil Wars. In other words, again, other than Kabuto, no other fossil should be alive in the modern age, because the Great Fossil Wars, and I'll talk more about it later, was a time in which two people were competing with each other, seeing who can discover the most species. And during that time, they were just throwing fossils together like mismatched jigsaw pieces until eventually they were getting entire creatures that did not exist. And that's how we have our abomination Pokemon fossils in Galar. It's hilarious, but also absolutely mortifying that such a travesty on paleontology existed. But I digress. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit more, or I'll remind you about it later, and let's move on to Omastar. It is believed that Omastar's extinction was a consequence of the increasingly heavy weight of its shell that then affected its mobility, including its hunting. Now, Omastar swam the seas in search of prey, including prehistoric shelter, which this would line up with why some of our Pokemon like Kabuto, as per their inspirations, would be eating multiple hard-shelled creatures as they imply, meaning that this confirms prehistoric shelter existing, but we don't know if they look exactly the same as they do now or different. Either way, it would be known to attack prey once they get close enough, first ensnaring prey with its tentacles before biting down with the deadly force through Omastar's beak, noted to have fangs powerful enough to crush rocks. Then it just kind of sucks out the insides, and it seems to live freely until a Caracosta preyed upon it. Otherwise, it is noted that its shell became so heavy that it couldn't really swim anymore, which may have made it difficult for it to get prey, and again lead to its extinction as opposed to the mass extinction event. And to close out this section, we have our crinoid Pokemon known as Lileep and Cradily. Crinoids were often called sea lilies, which explains why our duo have the grass typing. But crinoids were more akin to starfish, brittle stars, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers. The fun part? Sea lilies do actually continue to exist to this very day. Similar to Lileep and Cradily, they anchor themselves to the sea bed and would filter feed, eating plankton alongside other decaying organic matter. Though Lileep and Cradily have a different diet. Something unrelated to crinoids though, but acts as another inspiration for Cradily, is the predatory tunicate. It looks like a boxing glove on a stick, but it bears the same shape as Cradily as it opens up like a Muppet to eat its prey, and hopefully I found some footage that shows you exactly that. I'm probably gonna have to look at Monterey Bay Aquarium. They also reproduce all by themselves, so, you know, they don't need anybody else. They're not big, so they're not scary. I don't know why I said it like that. Either way, with inspirations in mind, we can really talk about our two Pokemon. Lileep states it lived in warm seas, which the seas at this point in time are still, again, much warmer than they are nowadays, so this checks out completely. It waves its tentacles around, disguising itself as seaweed to attract prey. Then it will strike when they get too close. It's like having the refrigerator door entice you with your favorite food only to slam on your neck a couple of times. Except, you know, they're swallowing you whole. Now, it'll cling to rocks and the seabed as stated, even being shown to cling to an Omanyte in the TCG. But it has been noted to be extinct for 100 million years. This means that it started to go extinct around this time. Not that they all just ceased to exist, considering that other dex entries state that other fossils have lived 100 million years ago, which is entirely fair for fossils in real life. These Pokemon being actual plants likely only started dying because of the cooling of the oceans, as there are no fossil Pokemon that we are aware of eating them. And if I'm wrong, then it just means everything went extinct around the same time anyway, thanks to something we're going to discuss later, so grain of salt on that. As for Cradily though, its heavy body acts as the anchor, as opposed to digging itself into rocks or attaching to anything. They secrete strong digestive fluids from their tentacles. They would be seen when the tide lowers, and those tentacles can extend to a total of over 3 times their usual length. Considering that this Pokemon is about 1.5 meters tall, we might be able to assume that each tentacle is a half meter. So, simply put, it can extend each of its 8 tentacles a total of 1.5 meters away from its body, assumedly. Honestly, it's a little bit horrifying to imagine getting caught and melted down for consumption by this Pokemon, but unfortunately for them, they lived in warm waters and otherwise went extinct. So, you know, nothing for us to worry about. I think it just primarily went after fish. So, with the waters cooling down, let's move on. Now, before we speak on any other fossil Pokemon, or at least in this era, there is one Pokemon that did begin its journey right here at the 100 million year ago mark, and that would be the Carbink that will eventually turn into Diancie, or Diancie, I say it how I want. I've said it a million times in other videos, and I'll say it a million more. Carbon turns into Diamond. Coal does not. This is why we have Carbink for Carbon, Diamond for Diancie, and Carbon under the right conditions can take a singular second or upwards of 100 million years to turn into Diamond. Technically, it could probably take even longer, but you know, that's just a number to appease people. And Carbink is known to even sleep for hundreds of millions of years. So somewhere within the world, or even in multiple spots throughout the world of Pokemon, there are Carbink deep underground, with some of them becoming Diancie in an effort to lead their Carbink brethren through life in happiness. I said brethren, but none of them have a gender. Either way. Moving forward from this, Anorith existed 100 million years ago and is inspired by the Anomalocaris, which is incredibly obvious when you compare them side by side because they're nearly identical. Now, Pokemon is just really out here copying homework, but I can't blame them because it's a dope Pokemon and a dope creature. Honestly, many of our fossils are, but thanks to this, we can currently assume that Anorith is the common ancestor of many, if not all, bug-type Pokemon. Unless, you know, Genesect has something to say about that, or another fossil Pokemon is revealed. But at least in lore, it is directly stated or considered the ancestor of modern bug Pokemon. Now, while Anorith can't survive in the modern oceans due to water composition, this could be chemicals, it could be heat, it could just be the amount of oxygen that is or isn't in there, I don't know. They could swim easily in the seas that they lived in, using its 8 wings like oars from a boat. By comparison, the real-life Anomalocaris was a top predator that did live 500 million years ago, 500 million years ago, according to National Geographic. It would track prey with amazing large stalked eyes, grab them with large spiked arms, and bite with a tooth-lined mouth. Although, unlike the real-life counterpart, Anorith is described to be a very kind Pokemon that will only catch prey as it hides among rocks on the sea floor. This means that Anorith is likely not the same apex predator that Anomalocaris was. But that same kindness or passive feeding does not extend to its evolution, who we will talk about later. I thoroughly believe that Armaldo, without having gills, would not have been a Pokemon that existed at this exact moment. If you want to believe otherwise, then just imagine me talking about Armaldo now instead of later. Instead, we are going to move on into what is called the Age of Fish. As a small note, this is when a mass extinction would have occurred if this was the real world, right between what Pokemon would represent as the Ordovician period and the Silurian period if we ignore the different time scales. But again, no mass extinction events seem to be present within the world of Pokemon, and we can move on to what would be considered the Devonian period. Clarification, there's one guaranteed mass extinction event. If I say that again, bear with me. But This is, in the Devonian period, a time when diversification really began. Nature is experimenting. It's taking entire plates of spaghetti, throwing it at the wall, and seeing what works. And that's just literally just what nature always does. Because land plants at this period started showing immense diversification as even seeds began to show for the first time that we are aware of. And that's huge when it comes to like development when it comes to plants. By being in a seed, you can allow yourself to last longer, you can lay dormant, you are resistant to external weather or just effects in general, and eventually, even if a lot of bad stuff happens and you all die, you might have hundreds of thousands of seeds just lying in different layers of soil waiting to come back. This is also where the oldest known fossils of insects and spiders date in the real world, alongside tetrapods, otherwise known as all land living vertebrates with 4 limbs. Kind of like us, you know? I mean, quite literally. And the first of Pokemon that should pop up into existence here, dated to be a fish that has gone unchanged for over 100 million years in the world of Pokemon, is Relicanth. It has no teeth, but it does have a full mouth, meaning that jaws now exist in the world of Pokemon. But it feeds on microscopic organisms and withstands enormous water pressure of the ocean depths with scales like craggy rocks. Also, I realize I don't think I mentioned it, this is when jaws began to develop, if I remember correctly. And Relicanth here is a beautiful homage to the coelacanth, a real-life fish that, while one of its many species exists to this day and has hardly changed in its visual appearance or habits, it was a creature that is described as a living fossil due to its age. Hence, Relicanth's rock, water, or water-rock, rather, typing. It's a little important which order you get that in. Now, the most interesting part about Relicanth and coelacanth is that the coelacanth is one of the 3 known creatures that first traveled onto land that we are aware of, and this is even supported visually as its fins move in an alternating pattern similar to how some land animals move, including you and me. Those same fins are on Relicanth, and theoretically speaking, Relicanth would be one of 3 ancient ancestors of many of our Pokemon if the world of Pokemon is following the understood history of the real world. And as the Pokédex says, Relicanth is a perfect life form, all because of it never changing all these years. And as a small note, Relicanth is one of the many Pokemon that, because of their inspiration, have become very near and dear to my heart. They're not in the top 10, not even the top 25, but easily one of the top 50 and one of my favorites to talk about. There's a lot of Pokemon out there, so don't at me, but it's, 50 out of 1,025 plus, that's pretty good. The only other Pokemon we can partially place here is Dracovish, and I am specifically talking about the head of Dracovish, as the body is an entirely different creature. This is, again, all because the 4 Galar fossil Pokemon are based on the egregious errors made during the Great Fossil War, a time in real-life history in which there are some very irresponsible paleontologists trying to one-up each other, find as many bones as they can, slap them together, and saying, "Hey, yo, check out this new abomination I made. It breathes out of its anus." And while I am joking here, it is not far from the truth. So, as I'm sure you know, none of the 4 Galar fossil Pokemon ever actually existed, but their separate species did as different Pokemon. And in the case of Dracovish's head, we have the Dunkleosteus. It was a creature that has the spitting image of Dracovish's head, or rather, Dracovish has the spitting image of its head, and was a massive lesson in history. The reason being is that they originally, in terms of the real-life Dunkleosteus, they thought it was massive, like 30, 40, 50 feet, some ridiculous number, right? And in reality, they found out and they agreed upon the size that it must be, being 10 to 20 feet long. And the reasoning as to how this was changed is because of a rule or law that they kind of put together that is way more simple than it should be, but it is true. And if you don't believe me, feel free to fact check me, as I always encourage everybody to do. It was shown that if a fish has a long head, it has a long body. But if fish have short head, it has short body. For the sake of comparison, think of a barracuda, or look at the screen right now. That thing has a long head and is shaped like a torpedo. Meanwhile, goldfish have short heads and short bodies. Heck, some of them are even shaped like a sphere because of how stout their heads are. Now, this just ultimately means that the dunkel would have had a shorter body than originally measured, but it is still 10 to 20 feet long, somewhere in there. It also had a powerful jaw that was so strong that it would just, when opening, create a mass suction that pulls in its prey. Just imagine opening your jaw and your food falls into your mouth. That is some SpongeBob Patrick level stuff right there, right? So there's your fun fact about one of the pieces that make up our fossil abominations. Maybe we'll get lucky one day and get to see them in their full glory and power. Though, I will admit, I do love them for what they are, even if their lives are absolute suffering. It's big bug time. Another big extinction would have occurred here if this was real life, but otherwise we have reached the Carboniferous period. The big word here? Carbon. As prehistoric vegetation began to grow, warm oceans surrounded select landmasses, tropical landmasses remained wet and humid, and an extensive amount of coal deposits that we have in the modern day are from this period in time. Imagine the coal mines in Sinnoh probably being like around here, you know, it's great. But the most important part of all is that there was a lot of carbon dioxide being removed from the air. So much so that oxygen levels rose because of all the plants coming in to about 35% compared to the 21% that exists in this day and age. Again, those seeds are making a massive difference, and there's a lot of carbon for those plants to go ahead and use up. And because of how insects process oxygen, if they were land, or technically sky-dwelling insects, I suppose, they got massive. Take the 8-foot-tall scolipede, for example. That would have just almost literally existed in the real world. And that scares every fiber of my being. Though I don't think Venipede or Cenoscourge existed in this time period. Their ancestors may have, especially as those two are related to each other, meaning that they have some sort of common ancestor. But how about we move on to one of the big bugs found here, Slitherwing. Now, there are a lot of questions as to whether or not our Paradox Pokemon are actually real, or if they could have naturally existed in our world, or if they're just completely made up, they're magic, they're wishes, they are from different timelines, whatever, I don't care, right? I am making the assumption, because of its close resemblance to what we know, that a Pokemon that is exactly like Slitherwing, or is Slitherwing of our timeline, would have existed at this time. Because a paradox is basically something that seems untrue, but when you look at it and the closer details, you find out that it actually is true. So it has to be something that exists in our world, but it's not specifically the Slitherwing that we know. And this would explain why it is so similar to Volcarona, but is not a genetic ancestor, okay? Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. With that though, Slitherwing, or whatever equivalent of Slitherwing that we have in the timeline we're in, just like Volcarona, has big Atlas moth or Cecropia moth vibes. Some have even compared Slitherwing to Cebissa leucotis, a bagworm. Though most importantly, despite it being big bug, its wings do not fold over its abdomen. This is seen with Volcarona amongst other moth and butterfly Pokemon. This is because they are part of the Lepidoptera family in real life. And the earliest we are aware of these creatures is when they occurred back around 200 million years ago. And what does this mean for Pokemon? I'm just saying it existed in the same area as other big bugs. Now, I will admit, if it was my choice against the strict timeline that Pokemon has, I would be placing Genesect right here, or in the previously discussed period. It would have made the most sense in real life, but instead, we don't get that. We get the Pokemon timeline, and we could talk about the great ancestor of Yanma, Yanmega. This bad boy is a fierce and massive dragonfly predator that is 6'3" long, or 1.9 meters. It creates shockwaves that could cause critical injury or knock down trees. It can carry adult humans and is found in wooded and swampy areas, which, guess where we are? a tropical, humid, swampy land. Well, not everything in the world was that way, but at least Yanmega lines up with what we expect it to for this timeline. This beast of a dragonfly flies at high speeds and wastes no energy as an efficient hunter, using its strong jaws to bite at enemy heads or other critical areas to get the job done in one strike. And of course it is inspired by Meganura Monyi, an ancestor of dragonflies and damselflies that was the largest of their kind, and thanks to the National History Museum, it is said that when they flew overhead, they would have blocked out the sun with their 2.5-foot wingspan. I'll pass, no thanks, but Yanmega is still pretty cool. Speaking of Pokemon that are cooler than they get credit for, I would like to suggest that Tangrowth existed during this time. It follows the same evolution method as both Yanma and Piloswine by means of the move Ancient Power. Yet, I never really see anybody talk about it when they talk about the history of the world or prehistoric history of the world. Now, it is a mass of vines or seaweed that grows from a creature at the center that we canonically don't get to see unless we look at the non-canonical beta baby sprite that never got released. In which case, it literally grows from it like hair, which would explain why Tangela and Tangrowth feel no pain when their vines are damaged or even completely ripped off. Tangrowth in particular will act as though it were a shrub and then capture prey. As if this giant kudzu plant wasn't terrifying enough, it does eat other creatures, though at least it has also been known to eat fruit, and it is also a creature that gets eaten. And when it is in a warm climate, its growth is so accelerated that its eyes can't even be seen. To counter this, it'll just straight up rip off its own vines. Now, looking at Tangrowth, it's kind of a sleeper monster in the making. Think about it. It grows fast, it can feed Pokemon that would hunt it, meaning that it could just make them go away if it can't beat them by feeding them, and without dying. That growth is not just defensive, but great as an offensive weapon, as it is a 2-meter tall vine monster that knows how to ambush its prey. When I think of Pokemon that could secretly take over the world, I look at Tangrowth. It would not be a loud takeover, but a slow and constricting whimper of humanity's life by the hands of this monstrosity. And because I mentioned it, yes, the kudzu plant is what I always associate with this Pokemon, a vine plant that started off as a plant that people used to provide shade and decor, only to find out that it grows at a rate of 1 foot per day and isn't very easy to take care of. They take over entire areas if left unattended, and is described often as the vine, or the rather invasive vine that ate the South within the United States. It blocks sunlight, strangles other plants, takes up root space, and then continues to conquer the lands in which it touches. Fun stuff. Now, moving on, we would have the Permian period, the time in which Pangea would have formed, thanks Regigigas, but it is in this time that we would likely find the existence of Dreepy. And I'm not talking about the Dreepy we know and love, but I'm talking about the true Pokemon, the one that Dreepy was before it went extinct. And honestly, this boomerang head is not just a mistake or a bad design. In fact, I will fight to my dying breath anybody who says that Dreepy is a bad design, as I will argue it is one of the best designs in all of Pokemon. Why? Because not only does it represent fighter jets in the same shape, but it also represents the real-life boomerang head salamander known as Diplocalus, a creature that would stretch your throat wide like it was a cartoon character eating a whole turkey. So good luck not choking on this bad boy. In all seriousness, though, it had the same tail, grew to 3 feet in length, while Dracopult grew to 3 meters in length, and that strange head that is basically the same exact head that we know our Pokemon have may have had a number of different benefits. These beautiful benefits include preventing it from being eaten due to the sharp and bony nature. It could act as an ambush predator due to a sleeker shape to skim across water easier, and it is thought to have eaten arthropods and plenty of small fish. And guess what? All of this should sound incredibly familiar to our stealth bomber ghost that is the Dreepy line, as even Dreepy directly states that it tries to eat Clauncher like it did when it was alive, while also being a Pokemon we find most often near water. I'm just saying, if you disagree with the perfection that is the Dreepy line, you and me, we're enemies. You can dislike it for your own tastes, but respect the Dreep. You know, I just realized I could make merch of that. Respect the Drip, respect the Dreep. Maybe I might get that done out there. You should go check out the Teespring. It's a thing. You get yourself a, you know, Pope Wormpole or other things that I will show in 3 seconds. Anywho, we're moving on. Once again, in real life, before the Mesozoic era, 90% of life would just gone, die, bye-bye. But now we have arrived into the era in which the thumbnail I made for this becomes relevant, as we are in the Mesozoic era, otherwise known as the Age of Reptiles. And interestingly enough, before the dinosaurs rose, the crocodiles were set to take over as kings of the planet. Along these lines, we would at least be able to mention 3 Pokemon who we might one day see ancestors of in this era of time. Typhlosion to represent the volcanoes, as it is literally the volcano Pokemon. Feraligatr to represent our ancient alligators and crocodiles, and Meganium to represent our sauropods in the form of plants. These 3 may not have existed during this era, but I am confident that something very closely related to them did, especially Meganium. Maybe we'll look out one day and see them. It wouldn't be a regional variant or form or anything, just like how Scolipede and Sislipede are said to be related to each other. It's just like, oh, this Pokemon's related to this one, and it's an ancient ancestor. Cool, right? Now, another Paradox Pokemon that I will at least mention due to its Dex entry, and I'm not going to do this for all of them that are like this, is Fluttermane. It is not the ghost of a pterosaur. That's just a fun rumor within an occult magazine within the world of Pokemon, but I knew if I didn't mention it, or even the, what is it, Iron Sands, correct me, editing acrylic, please, there'd be questions as to, oh, what about this Pokemon? And I can't just not mention it. I will share, though, that you can flip Mischievous and Fluttermane upside down, and you can see the full hairstyles and like their little eyes in a special little place, and it looks like they have like beads around like a top knot or something along those lines, and it's kind of cute. But let's move forward to find a Pokemon that we can estimate would exist at this point in time. Lapras. It has inspirations from plesiosaurs, but it has a shell which makes it very different from literally any known plesiosaur as of now. And yes, we are now in the Triassic period. Lapras is docile, but an effective hunter and intelligent creature, being able to understand human speech and even effectively strategize to fight with expertise. Something we can even see in the Pokemon Adventures manga, which I gotta say, if you love lore and a good story, go check out my coverage of the complete Yellow Saga. It's great. You won't regret it. But back to Lapras, they travel in pods and even almost went extinct. But over the years, their numbers have surged thanks to modern efforts, which has in turn resulted in the decrease of various fish populations. We could assume a number of different things, from it being a Pokemon that has outlived its time, it does not have anything to call their numbers in the modern age, to it simply being a powerful Pokemon in general. But something had to have caused the harsh drop in their population. And if it isn't anything that exists in the modern age, then it has to either be a big event or a Pokemon that is not currently alive that may have hunted it. We can also assume that since they are shown or said to live in tropical and polar areas in the modern age, they could also do so in the ancient times. I mean, the changing climate itself was likely not the reasoning for any depletion of numbers, though that's not to say anything to any dramatic changes, like the sky being blotted out in complete darkness, which totally doesn't happen later on and kill almost everybody. Yeah. Otherwise, the plesiosaur was thought to have cared closely for their young and were only pregnant with one at a time, something we can see being reflected in Lapras and its own young in the anime. And this is all sweet until we find once more in real life, we get another mass extinction event, one that was constant over time, as they often are. Now, to describe how bad this is, I mean, it's bad. Global warming goes wild. 3,000 foot tall waves of lava with 3 million square miles of area covered in said lava. Noxious gases enter the air, and 30% of all species bite the dust. But hey, that's only 30% of all species, meaning this could have actually happened on Pokemon Earth, and we'd still have a number of our ancient Pokemon still around. they're just having a very bad time being suffocated by ash, trying to survive rushing rivers, and the rise of new volcanoes. Really makes it hard to survive unless you can adapt fast enough, which, newsflash, you can't. But some of our Pokemon can, because they can literally evolve, not in the Darwinian sense, but in the Pokemon evolution sense. But rising from the ash and destruction, the dinosaurs dusted themselves off and lived. It is currently believed that the prototype feathers that they had on their bodies may have been one of the biggest reasons behind their survival in the real world. I'll talk about the discovery of dinosaurs having feathers later on with the incredibly important Pokemon that represents it. Instead, though, we have finally entered the Jurassic period. We get Dracozolt/Dracovish's legs and tail, as those were likely from a Stegosaurus of sorts, but that's all we really have regarding that Pokemon, as we don't even know what its front half is like, which is a real shame. But what isn't a shame is we have Aerodactyl, which more specifically may be based on pterosaurs that occurred later in time, but thanks to its mega evolution, we can understand that the mega evolution is what Aerodactyl used to look like when it first came into existence. If you look closely, it didn't lose its claws. Those spikes it has are its claws. It was more aggressive, stronger, and literally sharper predator in the ancient world of Pokemon. But it would eventually have lost these features and became more streamlined over however many years. In other words, I believe that Mega Aerodactyl was literally the first Aerodactyl, but it changed to the one we know. It died, and when we revived it, we got the most recent version, quote unquote. It was considered the king of the ancient skies, which brings me to this wonderful TCG card of Aerodactyl that I expanded in my own art and changed for this video's thumbnail. This card actually shows a number of different ancient Pokemon interacting with each other, or at least being in the same time period. Tortuga, Shieldon, Bastiodon, Rampardos, Archeops, Aerodactyl, and Tropius, who I'm going to call Tropius because I don't know, I like the pronunciation better that way, which, based on every other bit of info that I will present soon enough, alongside many of the other Pokemon-centric assumptions we've been making, this is very possible. So let's continue through the Pokemon's strange version of the prehistoric world and finish up Aerodactyl here. With Aero, it was a slow walker on land and nested in mountains in seclusion. This makes perfect sense for such a large creature of the skies. By having your nest on a mountain, you have less to worry about with other Pokemon, you get a good vantage point, and you conserve energy by already starting high in the sky, allowing you to, start your day strong, go out further in case you are in need of food, or are more desperate for food. And if it was in its mega form in these times, it was far more aggressive, attacking anything that moves. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that its mega form would have lived in an incredibly dangerous time, maybe even being brought into existence early in the Jurassic period, right after that mass extinction, so that way it could adapt and survive in such harsh conditions. A fierce personality for a fierce, hardship-filled time. And if for some reason, Mega Aerodactyl existing in this time bothers you, literally think about Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon. It's essentially the same thing, except, it's different energy and different adaptations and so on and so forth, but it's a parallel comparison. Now, what's fun about Aerodactyl, or even looking at their real-life inspirations, such as pterosaurs in general, is that they, unlike many other dinosaurs, did not evolve into birds of the modern day. In fact, they didn't even evolve into bats. They just kind of were their own thing. And having wings is something that has only adapted into existence that we know of 4 times. Insects, pterosaurs, birds, and bats, all being very different creatures. Though we have to hand it to pterosaurs, they were the first winged reptiles to take to the air that we are at least aware of. And the last amazing creature we have here in the Jurassic period is arguably my favorite fossil Pokemon of them all, Archean, and Archeops. They represent the massively historic discovery of the Archaeopteryx, the first dinosaur to be discovered having feathers, thanks to it being buried very quickly after its death. likely even being buried alive due to a mudslide or other encasement-causing event. The real-life Archaeopteryx was the spark that brought about the discovery of over 20 different dinosaur species that have been preserved Pompeii-style for our discovery, allowing paleontologists to definitively state that dinosaurs had feathers, and birds of the modern age just aren't related to dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, and that is the tightest shit to me. It still makes me emotional to talk about that. Anytime I see a bird as well, just as a fun little side note, just walking around doing its thing, I tell it to keep on going, you funky little dinosaurs, from an old meme. But what does this mean for Archean and Archeops? Well, it is believed to be the ancestor of all bird Pokemon, but in the world of Pokemon, there are claims countering this. The reason for that is because the Archaeopteryx was being questioned on whether it was a bird or a dinosaur before it was definitively found to be a dinosaur with feathers. Archean's wings were too small to be used for flying and would instead hop from branch to branch and glide long distances in order to catch prey. Not a big deal. Animals like pheasants do, something similar to this, and turkeys might even fly up into a tree from time to time. But what's most interesting about Archean is that in the episode Archeops in the Modern World, it was shown that Archean does not like Pokemon food, but can grow a special plant with its cries. It enjoys the berries grown on this plant as well. I have no scientific explanation for this because, yes, it is a proven point that plants will grow faster when introduced to a consistent sound, but last I checked, it doesn't matter what kind of sound that is, positive, negative, or otherwise, it just kind of grows. Might just be a stress response all in all. And this isn't really expanded on with Archeops, so we're just kind of left to the wind on that one. Now for Archeops, it is adept at running, giving itself a running start at 25 miles per hour or 40 kilometers an hour over a 2.5 mile or 4 kilometer course before taking off to the skies. What we would expect for them, or could expect for them, is that they would then live in open fields or grasslands that would allow them to have the space to not only run this distance, but also see predators far away from them in case they did need to run. This is compounded with the fact that they can hunt more efficiently on the ground, or even hunt in packs as an intelligent creature. One corners the prey before another Archeops swoops down on it, using intelligent tactics in hunting. It is said to be omnivorous, eating both prey and fruit. And the final note is that in the Pokédex, it is said that the plume fossil is very delicate, so if anyone other than a professional tries to restore it, it will just fail. Which, for the last time, matches the idea that the Archaeopteryx's feathers would have never been preserved without such a rapid and complete burial. A discovery of a lifetime, and theoretically speaking, being as colorful as they are, these Pokemon, is possible. After all, our monsters here have to attract a mate somehow. Now in the Pokemon Cretaceous period, we will continue through discussing another Pokemon that may or may not exist, or at least its equivalent does, Koraidon. Koraidon is called the Winged King. It was a formidable creature that could be incredibly aggressive. Its power surges under harsh sunlight thanks to its ancient energy, and is just overall a big, strange dinosaur Pokemon fit with the whole shebang of the feathers. But its signature move is called Collision Course, something that references the eventual coming of the meteor that sets off the final events for all of our ancient friends. If Koraidon or something similar did exist, and it was a creature that was a true king of the ancient world, then it likely just lived in Paldea, not the rest of the world. For the fun thing about the king of the dinos, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, is that they were not global. They basically started in Europe, and before the great land bridges fell, they traveled westward, finding themselves in what would be modern-day North America primarily. So, sure, they were kings. They were powerful and amazing, and we'll talk about that more later, but they weren't absolute kings of the world, just the areas that they were in. Not much left to say about Koraidon other than pure speculation, and I don't really want to do that and muddle things up. So we move on to talk about our sauropods, the long-necked dinosaurs that you know and love. living in what tropical areas there may be, we will find Tropius. Tropius is a simple and docile creature that has eaten its favorite fruit so much that it grows it on its body, and in adorable fashion, it has even been depicted sharing that fruit with others who are kind to it. I also would like to believe that it is in some capacity related to Meganium. What I find interesting about them is that they do continue to live in the modern age without having ever become a fossil, if we are to believe the TCG, and we usually find them in tropical areas within Hoenn, the Great Marsh of Sinnoh, Executor Island in Alola, I think specifically the Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, or just Ultra Moon, or Casa Royal Lake, amongst other areas in Scarlet and Violet. All areas that are near a great body of water, which may have had a hand in saving them, or at least in marshy lands in general, or tropical lands in general. The only one thing that may have saved them, actually, is that they do have plant biology. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to grow the berries that they have been eating so naturally. They are representative of palms in some capacity as well, so all in all, either their woody plant biology saved them, or they may have regrown in some capacity from seeds somehow. Either way, they're depicted to have existed for a very, very long time. From here, we have our other two sauropods of Pokemon known as Amaura and Aurorus, which states that it lived in a cold land where there were no violent predators like Tyrantrum, and when it whinnies, the aurora lights appear in the sky. So what we have here, instead of it being native to South America, it may have actually been even further south, technically still South America, I suppose, or much farther north in what would be the equivalent of, say, like Canada, or even further, who knows. Either way, it makes sense, as their real-life sauropod counterparts would not have dealt with the T-Rex. Specifically, one inspiration, the Amargasaurus, would not have seen a single Rex specifically, as it lived in Argentina, which, I mean, it could have, but it's pretty unlikely. Unfortunately for them, they were pretty close to ground zero for that big meteor. Other sauropods were a lot closer, and we'll discuss that later. Aurorus specifically is stated to be usually calm and kind, though it can create ice walls or encase enemies in ice when enraged, which I'm kind of surprised we don't have more fossils because of this, or properly preserved specimens, you know, completely being encased in ice by this Pokemon, but I guess not a lot of people decided to test its patience, especially as it has crystals on its body which produce freezing air clocked in at negative 240 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 150 degrees Celsius, which is nearly double the lowest air temperature record measured in Antarctica. So, you know, this Pokemon is not messing around. It was essentially the queen of the ancient dino world in its concept. Up next, we have some nice and simple fossil turtle Pokemon in the form of Tortuga and Caracosta, which are likely based on the extinct genus of sea turtles known as Protostega giga, one of the largest sea turtles, measuring out to being 10 feet long. But don't let that massive size fool you. It was an amazing swimmer that never got tired. The only hard part was that due to their size, they would struggle to move on land and lay their eggs. We see this reflected in our turtle fossil here, as Tortuga could only crawl on land in search of prey, but it may have dived to depths beyond half a mile. By the way, you don't just dive deep into the water without having good eyesight and a strong body that could take the pressure of the watery depths. Mind you, that is deeper than what a manned submarine, to my knowledge, can safely dive to before there's massive risk of injury or even death to the people inside the submarine. Unmanned submarines can go way deeper, and honestly, Tortuga is out here freeballing as if it's not an issue. Now, an important note is that Tortuga did live in warm waters, which should be a no-brainer, but it's nice to have that confirmation to support it being near Tropius, amongst some other info we'll get to soon enough. But Tortuga is the ancestor of many turtle Pokemon, as stated in lore, and evolves into our Proto-Turtle Caracosta. It's literally called the Proto-Turtle Pokemon, and this Pokemon can open a hole in the bottom of a tanker or knock out a foe with a single slap. Like, just get the turtle montage. It would use its shell to imitate a boulder to then ambush prey, and with the use of its extremely strong jaws, nothing was safe. it could eat steel frames, meaning that it would not waste any time picking bone from meat and instead just chew the entire body of the prey, allowing it to develop a thick and sturdy shell from all the nutrients, calcium, whatever, while being an active hunter on both land and sea. And despite its slow land movement, once it does catch prey, it'll just drag them kicking and screaming into the water to finish it off. One of its noted prey is actually Omanyte and Aerodactyl, meaning yes, once again, we have confirmation that their species survived this long, all the way from the beginning, which completely defies, well, actually no, it doesn't completely defy everything we know about them, because again, if it was true ammonites, it would defy it, but Omanyte and Aerodactyl just kind of represent ammonites as a whole, rather than just the true ammonites, breaking the rules of our real life rules and just they can do their own Pokemon rules. And finally, after all this time, because the waters are still warm and we do have confirmation of some species living for hundreds of millions of years, we can safely state that Armaldo will have found its way onto land by now if it didn't do so already. Again, if you want to, you can say Armaldo existed in the same time that Anorith did, but I really strongly believe that Armaldo, I like to roll the R, did not appear until now. Now, Armaldo has a lot of different things going on, but most importantly, it seems to start taking more after dinosaurs as opposed to insects by this point in time. Yes, it has some insect-like features, but it's just, it feels removed while only having a couple of those pieces. It lived on land by water's edge, diving into the ocean to hunt for prey while using its wings to swim. Its shell could protect it from attacks, while its claws could break stones and punch through a steel slab while extending or retracting. I don't want to be on the opposite end of that slab on the day that they brought it to life in a rampage. That sounds like some Shining level stuff right there, and that's terrifying. Now, even a blow from its tail is said to be devastating, and it is the ancestor of some bug-type Pokemon, as opposed to Anorith, who is considered the ancestor of all modern bug Pokemon. Now, how does that work, you ask? Well, in the world of Pokemon, age and evolution are two entirely separate factors. You can have a Pokemon that never experiences battle and never evolves. Think of like contest Pokemon, or house Pokemon, pet Pokemon properly, not any battling Pokemon, trainer Pokemon, you know? But either way, a Pokemon will still age and pass away. So we can say the same about any of our fossil Pokemon, and if we want to take that extra step, Pokemon outside of the games seems to hint at the idea that Pokemon can have babies that don't start at the first form. Mix in the idea that actual Darwinian evolution is happening here, and we get Armaldo, who is an entirely different species technically, but thanks to modern combat and how it was revived as a fossil, it can evolve into Armaldo through combat experience, very similarly to how Aerodactyl with a Mega Stone and Keystone can become Mega Aerodactyl. It's super convoluted, but it would take into account the strange reality of how both types of evolution do exist within the world of Pokemon. Now, Armaldo is a bit strange, and the closest I can get to body shape or anything like that is by looking at the Therizinosaurus, which is horrifying if you get caught in a back alley with that thing, but it was said to be a dinosaur that just was an herbivore, ate plants. So those terrifying mitts that it has were just used to help it get vegetation. But our Armaldo is yet another creature with claws that weren't just used for that, clearly. And they were similar, but not the same as Scyther and Kabutops, and I guess you could say Cleavor to some capacity, even though those are axes, meaning that similar to wings being adapted by different unrelated creatures, we have other Pokemon developing similar appendages, but with very deadly pointed arms. Actually, it's gonna suck when you want to pick something up. They don't have fingers, especially Scyther. I mean, I guess Caesar can kind of like, you know, crab claw stuff, but that's not the same. That's gonna suck. I will note we're likely getting the remaining pieces of dinosaur for the Galar abominations here, such as the Dromaeosaur from Dracozolt, which is another feathered and adorable dinosaur, but more importantly, we can actually talk about the king of the land dinos, Tyrunt and Tyrantrum. They both take their names, or their naming inspirations, from the word tyrant, runt, and tantrum, basically to show the childish nature of a tyrant king and their child, who is spoiled. Tyrunt specifically even directly stating that it is selfish and spoiled by nature, throwing a violent tantrum and running wild if it encounters something it dislikes. but of course, its jaws have the strength to shred an automobile and cause damage even when not intending to while playing. Though it does state that while it lived this far back in the past, it may have had a different form back then. As such, I'd better see some heavily feathered Tyrants in the past if we ever get to time travel in Pokemon. The fancy feathers around the neck just aren't enough to satisfy me. It looks good, but I want more. Meanwhile, we have the Despot Pokemon, Tyrantrum. I also found out Despot means to rule in a cruel and oppressive way, which actually lines up. Tyrantrum states that before its extinction 100 million years ago, it was known to be vicious, but had the presence of a magnificent king. Its powerful jaws, capable of shredding thick metal plates as easily as paper, made it invincible. Its strength allows it to sleep in the wild entirely unguarded without feeling worried. It is theorized that its original form was completely covered with a feather-like coat, which is cool. Now, real-life T-Rex are fun. They weren't all that fast, not like how Jurassic Park likes to say. They were not as fast or faster than a Jeep. You just get past the 20-mile-per-hour mark and you're good to go, I believe. But they could move quickly in small bursts. They were incredibly intelligent and were even pack hunters, with the leader usually making the first strike, while the remainder of the team or family would follow immediately afterwards, with each tooth exhibiting 3,000 pounds of force and bearing a total of between 50 and 60 teeth in their mouth. They had a massive head to support the amount of power that they could exert with every bite. And don't let the small arms fool you, because they would first bite you and then bring you close with their head and grab you with these incredibly muscled arms. They were so full of muscle and just so much power that once they grabbed you, it is said that you were not escaping. It was basically impossible. And to make it all that much better, they were smarter than a dog, but not smarter than like the highest or higher end chimps. Meaning they're really intelligent. And again, that's smarter than every dog, according to our estimates. And I do have to say this now. Thank you, Steve Basati, paleontologist and author of The Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs. I had fun emailing him a long time ago when I first covered fossils, and his information has been reinforced into my brain so I could make a better video for you today while doing additional research. But we aren't done. There's a lot more to cover, for Tyrantrum may have had all of this power and more, but they aren't ruling the world. Again, just a few select areas. And we only have a few more Pokemon before we get into the next mass extinction, followed up by some more prehistoric events, as we now get to talk about two pairs of Pokemon that adapted alongside one another, the Shieldon-Bastiodon duo and the Cranidos-Rampardos duo. Now, Shieldon and Bastiodon represent the ultimate defense, an impenetrable shield, and were simple herbivores based on ceratopsian dinosaurs, more specifically likely being the Protoceratops, with their massive 5 heads that you could easily advertise whatever you want on. They didn't even have horns on their head either, so it matches up rather nicely for the most part. Our Pokemon were said to have lived in primeval jungles and dense forests, hence their interactions with Tropius. Now, Shieldon has a habit of polishing its face against tree trunks. It is speculated that few enemies would have considered challenging its armored face. It eats grass, tree roots, and berries. Its fossils show no sign of damage to its face, but its body, plenty. And Shieldon is described as having a mild-mannered nature that dislikes conflict. They're able to live in the modern era, as they are found in the canyon biome of Blueberry Academy's terrarium. Its fossil was first found buried in clay, meaning that this Pokemon likely died and was buried by a massive mudslide. With Bastiodon, it adds in that it lived in herds, and despite its rough exterior, it was just a big ol' softie that was docile and caring to others. Its shield-like face being as tough as a diamond and capable of repelling any attack. And much like the Phalanx, they would line themselves up side by side to form a wall in which nothing could break through. This is vital for not only protecting themselves and their soft bodies, but also their young, from Pokemon such as Tyrantrum, as very much like Tyrannosaurs and our Triceratops, they would have likely encountered each other pretty often and had plenty of fights. Now, the problem with such a great defense from the front is that you are left helpless if attacked from behind. And because their face plates were so hard, people used to think that it was part of their spine when their fossils were first discovered. Many of their corals came from the Pachycephalosaurus-inspired Pokemon, Cretaceous and Rampardos. And I'm not even remotely exaggerating. Look at the Pachy and you will see that Pokemon copied nature's homework again. Not that I'm complaining, I'm just saying Mother Nature might get a little upset if she does find out. And it's not just in design, it's similar in supposed temperament and attack plan as well. Cretaceous' main method of attacking involves charging headfirst into opponents. It would snap obstructing trees, down prey, even go toe-to-toe with Pokemon like Aerodactyl and other Cretaceous. But I don't really imagine that going all too well for Cretaceous here, especially since Aerodactyl could just, pick up the little idiot and drop it into water or down a mountain to break up all of its bones and make it for an easier meal. Not to be graphic there, but, that's what some flight creatures do. You may have a tough skull, but good luck with the rest of your body. The resulting sound, though, of two Cretaceous headbutting echoes through the entire areas that they are in like the sound of a pleading bell. It notably lacks any intelligence. They are considered to be a rare sight to encounter, and the fossilized trunks of trees snapped in two are also often found near the fossilized rock layers of Cretaceous fossils. And they can also be found in the canyon biome terrarium as well. They are about as straightforward as their attack plan, but does that change at all with Rampardos? Not really. Though I do believe the real-life dino was not actually this dumb. Rampardos was ruthless and would tear down trees chasing its prey. Known to have the personality of a brute that enjoys barging into objects to train its strength and reflexes. This ultimately resulted in a 1-foot thick skull that made its brain smaller than Cretaceous', leading people to believe its stupidity is why it went extinct. And of course, when they revived it in the modern age, it just destroyed a skyscraper on a rampage before they got it back under wraps. Yet for some reason, they now have it in the terrarium, having clearly not learned their lesson. From here, we could fit in Roaring Moon if it was truly a prehistoric creature that was around at the time, but there's nothing to really compare it to. It's a feathered dragon, so this would mean that we have yet another species separate from all else, adapting the ability to fly, which is dope, but leaves us at a dead end, no pun intended, for information regarding Roaring Moon. What also leaves things at a dead end is absolute massive extinction, which is happening right now. Long story short, a meteor crashes down specifically into the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, now named the Chicxulub Crater. Put the Google thing here to pronounce that for me, please. I should have done my homework and learned how to pronounce that. This meteor will also be the one that kickstarts the extinction of any of our ancient Pokemon that are not able to adapt fast enough to the coming changes. For when this meteor strikes, it causes a massive impact, earthquakes in the area, volcanoes erupt, which sends out lava that is deadly, but the biggest kicker is something that we would equate to the darkest day in Galar. For when these volcanoes erupt, it's not just one or two, but tons of them, we suspect, as they were already prepared to burst, but the impact of the meteor just kind of sped things up. The sky is blotted out thanks to a ridiculous amount of pyroclastic material paired with deadly gas, meaning if you could withstand the gas, you now had to withstand a changing environment, as everything was dark and started getting colder and colder for a very long time. Even those in the water weren't as safe, as superheated geysers may have been erupting at the same time before everything started getting cold and oxygen levels were fluctuating all over the place in land, water, sea, whatever, you know what I mean? This was not a one and done instant extinction. This took a great amount of time. But here's a really fun thing I found out, is that there are 4 paradox Pokemon that may just represent this dark time in dinosaur history. These Pokemon would be Walking Wake, Gouging Fire, Raging Bolt, and even Brute Bonnet. Walking Wake would represent the geysers with the ability Hydro Steam, and it even looks like a dinosaur with a great mane of feathers. Honestly, all 3 of them do. Then you have Gouging Fire, who of course represents the volcanoes that erupted throughout the world, as it can also cause an eruption with just one roar. And finally, of this trio, we have Raging Bolt for the dark skies and raging storms that occurred as the world flipped into turmoil. But the only one I didn't mention when I talked about that big event is how Brute Bonnet would fit in. It's very dinosaur-like in its appearance while still being a fungus, which may actually be representative of many types of fungus blooming in incredible amounts in our world, thanks to all the death occurring and the climate change and all these new bodies that are now fit for decomposition during this great cataclysm. This is based on a hypothesis that as this fungus bloomed, dinosaurs and other reptiles were less resistant to being infected, while mammals were more resistant to infection. This in turn would cause more death in our reptiles, while mammals could have one less thing to worry about on their plates, because they would be a little bit more resistant, we believe, which would eventually lead to the rise and success of mammals, or at least in some capacity it helped. In fact, now that I look at all of this, it is said that 100 million years ago is when all these Pokemon went extinct, which is just an estimate to my understanding. Future editing Acrylic is here without lab coat or anything because of the headache that happened at this part. I was peer reviewing the work that I have here with a number of other people, and things got messy because at 2 million years ago, we're jumping way ahead, the Area Zero underdepths are said to have possibly been formed by seismic shifts, but it also notes tectonic movement as well in notes throughout it all, according to Professor Sada and Professor Turo. Terapagos is said to have inhabited Paldea in this bygone era, and it was thought that this species was pushed to the brink of extinction due to being caught up in these seismic shifts. However, at least one managed to survive by changing the energy in its body and turning into a crystal lying dormant in the Area Zero underdepths. I'm just going to quickly say now, Terapagos has no descendants from it that we are aware of. It is basically the end of its line and is more equatable to the idea of the sea turtle that lived 1,000 years and grew seaweed upon its body, or 10,000 years, I apologize. But I will say with Terapagos, it is important to note that there's something very special that happens when a meteor comes down, and it's when we find iridium. Iridium is something that is so rare on the planet that if we find like a coating of it or layers of it or a large amount of it, whatever, then we know with a decent understanding, especially when you look at an impact site, that a meteor struck that area because they usually end up carrying iridium with it. Iridium is also just kind of given this characteristic of having very colorful or stellar attributes, and that's something that we can match up with our stellar type Terapagos. Its multicolored shell, and honestly, even when you look at the shape of it, and I understand that it kind of could also represent the world turtle, as it does have itself upon its own back, and that's kind of how the world turtle works, but we can have a mixing of multiple ideas here. So theoretically speaking, with these little pieces being tied together, we can add additional evidence through our understanding of Terapagos, iridium, and meteors that a meteor did crash here to create the crater. Fast forwarding then 1 million years ago, the Great Crater of Paldea is formed. The problem with the Great Crater of Paldea is the fact that it looks so perfectly like a meteor crash site. I mean, if we look at the Chicxulub crater, it's basically a one-to-one, or even just to other meteor craters in general. And with the Chicxulub, the situation with that was it had similar walls that were 15 kilometers high. The only difference, though, was the slope and the make of the material, which then caused it, especially with erosion or weathering in general, to wear down and stop having that, which would have bled into the underdepths below, alongside any moisture, some water, any freezing of that water, which would have created more cracks, and then melting of the water to then create all the waterfalls that we see in those areas. This would also explain why it is often seen by people to be a caldera, or mistaken as a caldera of sorts. This theory then combines everything together to show that it could have been, well, it's not, but it could have been the area in which the meteor came down after the underdepths were formed, crashed, things filled up, drained, repeat, keep going, all the weathering, all the erosion, and all of this would have been perfect if it wasn't said to be 1 million years ago. Now, don't get me wrong, Pokemon does have a different timeline going on where it likes to state, oh, hey, 100 million years ago, these Pokemon were alive, but they also went extinct. But they don't give us an exact year, when 66 million years ago is said to be pretty much when a lot of prehistoric life went extinct. So we're not given an exact day. Theoretically speaking, with all of the ideas that are here, could this have been the one that actually, or this crater site, have been the one that caused the extinction of our prehistoric Pokemon? Yes and no. We can't assume that, unfortunately, because around the 1 million year ago mark, we're starting to get into the Ice Age. Actually, we're pretty dead into the Ice Age, because about 34 million years ago, in real life, is when the Ice Age began. So, again, we have to deal with the idea of Pokemon and real life timelines not matching up, or being all over the place, which makes things a lot nastier. Now, somewhere around the 200,000 year ago age in real life is when human ancestors were running around. So, theoretically speaking, we could say the Homo sapien equivalent of the Pokemon world existed as well. The only difference, though, is whether or not you take the following information as literal, as we read in the Sinnoh folk story number 3. There once were Pokemon that became very close to humans. There once were humans and Pokemon that ate together at the same table. It was a time when there existed no differences to distinguish the two. This also leads into canonical Pokemon marriages, but that might not be a literal marriage as in holy matrimony of love, but a marriage of agreements in general. Honestly, the whole thing is a mess, but theoretically speaking, there is always the possibility, and it would make sense for humans and Pokemon to be very distantly related. This would also account for human durability, psychics, adept fighters, and so much more within the world of Pokemon, even Aura Masters for that matter. Either way, we have the Homo sapien equivalent wandering around the world right now. But then about 20,000 years ago, the meteorite containing Eternatus fell into the Galar region, and we know that had a massive impact at the time. This is not when the first darkest day did occur, but with an asteroid as large as Eternimax, you can understand the sheer amount of damage this would have caused. There's a small note to state that the first clay doll was brought to life from a clay doll, which this would also imply that human ancestors were now advanced enough at this time to have been able to create clay figurines in the first place. And then 10,000 years ago, the Pokemon equivalent of the Pleistocene Age occurred. And of course, during the last era of the Ice Age, Mamoswine were roaming around with their big tusks and doing their thing. Mamoswine lived all around the world during the last Ice Age, but its population thinned when the climate grew warmer. They inhabited cold places, such as mountainous regions and the frozen tundra, and Weavile is a natural predator of Mamoswine, the monsters that they are. Though I don't think that means they were around back then. It's hard to say, especially as we have Hisuian version, and that one didn't really hunt them. It's a little weird. Or at least I don't know if they hunted them or not. Either way, they do represent our woolly mammoth, which is actually one of the smallest, or if not the smallest of the mammoths that we are aware of. But these are still some incredibly fierce creatures, so don't get in the way of their icy tusks. Now, as the years did go on, we have an incredibly strange Pokemon that goes against anything and everything that I know of and can find within history and biology and everything else, and that is Cetoddle and Cetitan. Well, Pokemon that, based on our understanding of Pokemon and animal biology, and even Pokemon biology, it goes against everything we understand. And allow me to explain this as best as possible. Over time, creatures adapted to be on land, as we talked about with Relicanth or the Coelacanth. And eventually some of these creatures decided that the deep blue sea was somehow less scary and turned their butts back around and became whales. In other words, cetaceans. But with Cetoddle and Cetitan, they flipped the script one last time and said, yeah, you know what, maybe the land wasn't so bad. Going even further to keep their incredibly thick layers of fat as they returned from the sea to the land, and that fat now allows them to withstand and thrive in frigid climates within Paldea or any other future regions in which we may find them. There is not a single creature in the world that we know of that has done this, gone from sea to sea back to land. But here we are. And I guess technically there's no singular creature that actually did that anyway. It takes a lot of, time and descendants and evolution and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so theoretically speaking, whatever. But Cetoddle is stated to be a close relative of Whalmer. However, unlike Whalmer, who once lived on land before becoming a sea-dwelling species, Cetoddle used to live in the ocean a long time ago before it migrated onto land. And that is strictly stated by Pokemon. Cetoddle live in cold regions, in pods consisting of around 5 individuals. It loves minerals found in snow and ice, which, technically speaking, ice is a mineral. It's a weird thing to say, but yeah. And through using an ice stone, you can evolve it into Cetitan. And Cetitan has tough muscles which allow it to support its weight and attack with immense physical power. It also has a thick layer of subcutaneous fat, which helps it migrate around snowy areas. It lives in pods and shares habitats with Avalugg, and as mentioned in Breathe Out, in Paldea, Cetitan mainly live on top of Glaciato Mountain, and their main diet consists of snow and ice. It's also mentioned that Cetitan can also use echolocation to find and communicate with others of its kind through sound waves, and the sounds that it makes is said to be similar to that of a flute. In Ice Battle Cold-Eyed Crucia, Cetitan is shown to be able to slide around ice and snow on its belly to move faster across said terrain. So that's pretty cut and dry. I mean, we still have it using echolocation. It's just wild to me to consider the idea of it evolving from a whale back to a land dweller. And I'm never going to fully wrap my head around that. I just have to accept it, and you do too. Now, as Mammothine started to go extinct, and considering mammoths and elephants belong to the same order, we could assume that we have found the missing link between some form of mammoth Pokemon and Donphan through the paradox Pokemon known as the Great Tusk. The only real confirmed info we would have on it, though, would be that it has giant tusks, hard scales, and is more aggressive than normal Donphan. I would say that it can't roll up into a ball, but in the anime it is shown to do exactly that anyway. In addition, we could talk about Screamtail, which seems to visually represent cavemen in some capacity while also being a poor singer. The remainder of the info we currently have is not the most reliable regarding it, but it is important to note as a close parallel to humanity and humanity's development of singing over time. From here, we get the last of history. The remainder of history is relatively simple and will lead us up to the 5,000 year ago mark where I am stopping because we start getting strong human influence that is properly recorded and is really not prehistoric influence technically anymore. Cyclizar existed in this era and lived alongside humans, being ridden by them so the Pokemon can be warmed up, while also providing transportation and warmth to humans as well. Regigigas creates golems in its image, Regirock, Regice, Registeel, and then pretty much from there, we get 2 more, Regieleki and Regidrago eventually, which are clusters of electric energy and dragon energy respectively. And these may have actually happened throughout history as a whole rather than right now, of course, because there is some evidence or understanding from the community that Regirock would be the Stone Age, Regice is the Ice Age, Registeel for the Iron Age, Regidrago would be the Middle Ages, and then the Modern Age would be represented by Regieleki. So those have the potential of occurring later on, but that's assuming Pokemon follows the rules of history of the real world, which, as we have discussed, it kind of just doesn't. 5,000 years ago, Go-Goat was domesticated primarily for transport, which has allowed it to develop a psychic connection with humans in the modern age due to their connections all these years, and I'm kind of happy it's not an actual psychic type. I appreciate those little things, or those little details for Pokemon. And finally, somewhere within all of this, Rockruff became the first dog Pokemon to be domesticated by our human ancestors. In fact, their real-life counterpart is the Spitz breed of dogs, which is believed to have been potentially the first or one of the very first dogs to be domesticated. And from here, you should know the history of Pokemon, from the darkest days to the ultimate weapon and so much more. But if you want to listen to another timeline, go check out my Great War timeline. It's got a lot of good theories to connect the world of Pokemon together. Otherwise, that's the end of this video. And again, if you've enjoyed this, thank you so much for watching. Please do make sure you do subscribe, share this with others. If you want to spread this video further, you can either share or you can just comment, as watch time and comments does actually help a video get shown to more and more people, because that's what YouTube likes to see. And if you'd like to give the channel more watch time, go check out another video. If you'd like to even go the extra mile and support the channel, become a member for as little as $3 a month. It helps the channel immensely and ensures I can continue making content just like this and more. And you get a number of special little perks, getting to see videos early, you get emotes, you can get a special chat in our Discord, which if you haven't joined the Discord, join the Discord. You get extra behind the scenes stuff. And finally, the biggest one that happens every video is that you get your name shouted out at the end of every single video as a thank you. And that's exactly what we're going to go do right now. I had it and then I lost it in our members shout out. Starting with all of our Gods of Hope, co-founders in 14, Heals for Life, Biggins, Batty, Knit, Buzz, and Summer. With our champions, Andrew Mercy, Costa, and Joshua Biggins Wilson. With all of our Knights of the Court, Crumbo, Double, Shiny Gem, Zero, Biz Boys, Moth Romance, Vitey Lemon, Fix My Nitrogen, co-founders in 14, Wow, Annie Stone, Allen, Heals for Life, Blue Dalek, and Warren Ethel. With all the Wanderers, T-Baggins, Big Rosie, 45, Domain Regato, Zach Arrowwood, Bust, Just Bad, Tone Shiner, Moms for Seti, Bluet's Gecko, Casablanca, Mercury XV, Nicole Manassian, Live R316, Matthew Kennedy, Mark Wachowski, Electro Lucario, Nick, Kristen, Sandwich Boss, Emmy, Brian Griffin, Real, Rick Basher, 45 AD, John W, 1M, S9, Star U, Will, Gibbo, Kevlar, Dadon, Wexy, Young, The Lawn, Estelle, The Olive Branch, Pisha, Salty Eggs, Dia, and Sanguinous TV, WDA, Young, Wada Young, Script, Number 2, whatever this is, Venny Samari, Verse, the Pink Hair, Saiyan, Max Supreme, Just 40 Emperor, Glitch Queen 83, Wade Marlin, Gilpin, Average Pokemon Fan, T-Day, No Offense, Michael Stein, Jay Gill, Grayson, Rob, Big Papa Couch, Bods, and Clips, Make Hell, Jace, James, Links, Ocean Man 7, Internet Person to look into, Rolando J. Calderon, Delinks, Tunkinator, Nori, Brett Richardson, Ethan Salzman, McJethro, PVT, Muhammad A, Sunset Star, Dominic Ziek, Fruit Punch Cloud, Pato Mareko, Commander Flyboy, JC, Brian Perez, Donkey Nug, Ada Karagak, Napoleon Bonaparte, Tulip, Tyler, Nath, Villain, Delta, Spartan, Andrea, Verlin, Leslie Lakes, Yuri, Chumple, Stiltskin, Freddy, 123, Kenneth, Abedroth, Brandon, Crutchfield, Custard Bun, Dawson, Reed, Hotshot Games, Dine, Digger, Hackon H, Eve Seller, Crosby's Gaming Stars, Angel Horace, Hashim Akamos, Sweetie Weber, Jingerman Jensen, Sam Wasabi, Handbook Dirks, Nathaniel Matthews, Jacob, Yaga, the Demonic Neko, Dunsey, Jonas, 00 Lemon, Jergalvian, Soldodochi, Datboy Frito, Zukier, Seth Coleman, Raxiel, Timid Warlock, Exushiki, Tom, Luigi the God, Funky Rowdy, Kid, Katuos, Alolan Figment, Delightful Nerd, Morgoth, the Stardies, Dragon Pulp, Lifting, Hings, Fat Tax, Arxes, Off Balance, Caden 42, PBOLI, Gabriel Timeline, The Coppersmith Inc., Mina Mori, Bogby Schmidt, Jacob Thies, Lost Mysterio, Ponyboy 4444, Maisie, Whamma Wham, Crescelion, Joe Heron, Pika Miku, Not Plague HD, Snows Leaves, Jerry Rivera, Emir, Medico TH73, Spurgalicious, Sydney House, Abdallah Ladi, Dr. Jack the Hefted Anachronist, Turbo Fish, Zama, Thibs, 2341, Fart, B, Bob, The Fish, Eric Palayo Moreno, Bryden C, Anthony Wells, Bradley McDonald, Sammy, James Wilson, King Kobo, Boca Chris, Spoiled Cheese, Cool Breeze, Dylan Bear, Chorgon, Nick Garcia, C, Brett Miller, Riz Smith, Spooky Spirit, Riz, Salty and Kai, Michael Hayes, Gory Malcolm, Suki Satsuki, 232, The Black Dragon, Phantom Missions, Allison Warren, Iseko, Kesso, Mythier, Mouse God, Gem, Ghost, Mix, Arabia, and Adam the Pokemon Weed, Clearly Milk, Widows, Karen, Tamarco, Neil the Simon for Fossils, Marcus Hull, Yigan Cal 12 Food, Nix, You, Lamac, Dragon King, Just Dragon, Kagyo, Tsuki, Professor Bond, Night Owl 707, Miss Zora, Dakota Couch, Brad Sundheimer, Drixel, Carl Jean, Hunter Owl, Hassan Kassam, Rebecca Connell Hune, Jappy W, Memento Mortal Corn, Marshy, Edward Kosowski, Fennec Fox, Evil Chan, Panda Nerd, Spreeberg, Hag, Addy Cadabra, King Pie, Jack of the Frost, Precious, Snivy, Ruby, Addy C, Jacob Square, GJ Monk 23, Squidwater, Riot Smith, Gamer, Bad Dragonite, Just JM, Star S, MD, Horse the Cocktail, Hey Bell Yeet, Micah 626 Gaming, Muse, Arwell, Lumio, Gwendolyn, Scanner 772, Andrew Frost, Peak Anonymous, Summer Sloth, Knock Nguyen, Ian Ray, Big and C9, Corner to Cop, Jojo and Sealy King, the Forians Guys, Daniel Tracy, Garrett Hoffman, Rosif, Dylan Peters, Malachi Burkhart, Carlisle, and Heather Wiseman. Thank you all for being members of the channel. It supports the channel an immense amount. And if you can become a member and you want to hear your name at the end of every single video, please do consider becoming a member. It helps the channel immensely and helps me support creation of great videos. So with that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't you think I'm going to do? Don't think I'm going to do. Please be nice to each other. I love you and I'll see you next time. Bye.